I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're diving into two fascinating books written by one of my favorite guests. His name is Tracy Emerick, Ph.D. The books are called Nifty Neighbors, Mr. Rogers and Jesus Christ, and Extreme Entrepreneurs, Steve Jobs and Jesus Christ. Dr. Emerick takes a deep look at the values and traits of these influential figures, exploring what we can learn about being good neighbors and bold entrepreneurs. Through these intriguing comparisons, we'll uncover insights that can inspire both our personal and professional lives. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us once again here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Atticus Publishing for helping us put him in the spotlight today, and we ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his amazing book. The links are below this interview. Doctor, great to see you. Wonderful to have you back on our show today.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Your books are always great, insightful, forthright, and entertaining, which helps you keep turning the pages. These latest editions are wonderful. Let's start out by Mr. Rogers and Jesus Christ. Nifty Neighbors. A lot of people would say, hey, what do these two men have to do with each other? What do you say?
Well, it's kind of interesting to start with. Mr. Rogers is kind of a period character. Mm-hmm. If you talk to kids today, they might not know who Mr. Rogers is, but the books were written for people in their 40s and 50s. So that was the Mr. Rogers era. I understand now Mr. Rogers has been converted to a cartoon,
really,
rather than the live individual, since he's not alive anymore. But the concept of Mr. Rogers is that in the era of the Saturday morning shows, Sesame Street, when there was a lot of activity and characters and things going on, Mr. Rogers came along. And he was mellow, he was quiet, he was soft-spoken, and he always did the same things. He walked into the room, he took off his jacket, he put on a sweater, then he took off his shoes and put on sneakers. So he was very predictable. And all the time the music was playing Won't You Be My Neighbor in the background. And then he proceeded to he had props, he had some little characters, he had a little train, and he had different things. But the show moves so slow compared to Sesame Street.
Yeah.
But the kids love it, and they'd sit there and just watch everything he had to say. Everything he did had a moral to it. He was very ethical. He had a moral to every story. There were some conflicts, and that was intentional that he had conflicts so he could have conflict resolution. But he was a great teacher. And also he was himself. He wasn't playing Mr. Rogers. He was Mr. Rogers in real life.
Exactly. And when you think about Jesus, of course, what does Jesus really want us to be? He wants us to be good neighbors, right?
That's right. Love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah. So it's a great comparison. What do you say to those, out there who might at first be ruffled or have their feathers ruffled by seeing Mr. Rogers compared to Jesus Christ or Jesus Christ compared to Mr. Rogers? I know from your books that there's no disrespect and no irreverence at all, but instead you're focusing on the Christ-like virtues of each of these other men, correct?
You're exactly right. And it's intentional that you would be a little upset.
Yeah.
That you would say, what is this? Hey, good. The title worked.
Exactly. It's been provocative enough to get you to lift it up and take a look.
That's right. And through the chapters, it emphasizes the godliness that we have within us, and also the humanness that God has towards us. And that theme is in all four books in some form, to try to make that connection, because religion in the U.S. is kind of separated from daily life. We've got our day-to-day life, and then, oh, by the way, I go to church on Sunday, or I go to synagogue on Saturday, or whatever. Right. But it's separated. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to say these are not separate. You're the same person,
Right.
and you should carry the same values and the same virtues and the same beliefs in your private life as you do, I mean, in your non-religious life as you do
Right.
in your quote religious life.
Absolutely. Let's talk about Mr. Rogers and what we can learn from Mr. Rogers. What are some of the valuable lessons that people in today's society can learn from this man in the cardigan sweater and the sneakers?
I think one of the most
Mhm.
valuable lessons is to listen. Listen to your neighbor. I don't think we listen to each other anymore,
Mm,
because even when we're on receive, when we're supposed to be listening, we're already thinking about our next response.
right.
So we're not really hearing the people we're talking to, because we're waiting for our turn. It's my turn to talk now. But Mr. Rogers let everybody speak, and they let everybody get their full thought out. I had a consultant in a business I was running, where we were running a sales meeting, and he came in and he said, "Here's the rules. One person talks at a time, and they talk until they're done. Nobody interrupts, and when that person's done, he looks or she looks to the person to the left and hands off the baton, so to speak."
Mm,
It went marvelous
yeah.
because there were rules, and the rule was listen, and then when it's your turn, you get to talk. So I think that's part of what Mr. Rogers' value is having respect for other people, having concern for other people, and also, having your own conclusions. He obviously had a message he was trying to deliver, but he did it in a nice way, in an uninterruptive, calm, and loving way, so to speak.
Yeah. So gentility certainly is a value we can learn from him. Patience, like you said, it was kind of a slow-paced show where he talked very purposely. You
Right.
know, people generally don't talk that way on TV. They talk like me, like very, very fast and lots of
Right.
energy.
I got to get all those
Um,
words in.
exactly, exactly. So there are lessons that even I can. So for now, I'm going to conduct my interview. I'm going to say, "Hello, Dr. Emerick.
Right.
Welcome to our show."
Yeah, we'd
But
probably get upset.
exactly, exactly. But the bottom line is, and I know as a journalist, is it's so important to listen. It's more important to listen to what the other person is saying than to hear what you have to say.
Right.
And if that value can be passed along to business leaders, entrepreneurs, scholars, that listening to what other people have to say will actually contribute more to your own life and society more than you just spewing out your recitation of whatever,
Right.
things will go more smoothly, like that meeting that you mentioned.
Right. And I think part of these have kind of grown into a set of podcasts themselves, which
Mhm.
are going to be entitled Leadership Frontier. And
Wonderful.
it's taking the character like of Mr. Rogers as a leader, and employing or deploying or using his methodology of listening and then showing concern. So I think, you know, he was a leader in his own way.
Hmm.
He was swimming upstream as far as programming went. He was right on the money as far as ethics and values, which were not always that important. And it was because he lived it, because he was a Baptist minister, and he lived his faith.
Interesting, interesting. I didn't know that about him, and but it makes sense as you say that for sure. So this is a podcast you're starting yourself, where you're
Yes,
going to examine each one of these figures, like Martin Luther King, like Steve Jobs, and have a discussion about them.
as and also in the context of leadership,
Mhm.
because one of the questions that has come out in a different interview was, how do we use this in our daily life? How do I incorporate this? And so that part of that is having control of yourself.
Yeah.
And so I started including ourselves as being leader of ourselves, because we have a tendency to get into kind of like not a herd mentality, but a mentality of the moment,
Right.
Like once the dialogue starts picking up, we get in it and we're participants. But at some point, you have to become an observer and a listener of what in the hell's going on here.
Exactly.
And if you sit back and say, what are we doing here?
Right.
You can be very valuable as the listening individual in the dialogue. So
Absolutely.
it applies to ourselves.
Wonderful, wonderful. The name of the podcast series is going to be called what?
Leadership Frontier.
Leadership Frontier. So we will
Right.
look for that on the major platforms, and more conversations with Dr. Tracy Emerick about Mr. Rogers and Steve Jobs. And what I love about this vehicle that you've created for comparisons with Jesus Christ is that there are endless opportunities to explore.
Yes.
Like, for example, you could look at Jesus Christ and Elon Musk. How are they similar? Donald Trump
Right.
and Jesus Christ.
Right.
To be fair, Kamala Harris and Jesus Christ,
Yep. Yep.
because there are, no matter how you feel about an individual, there are admirable qualities in everybody,
Yes.
and lessons to be learned. You know,
Yes.
I mean,
Yep.
I'm sure there's even qualities in Charles Manson on things we could
Well,
learn about leading a group, about having influence,
he
about,
certainly, yeah, he knew how to work. He knew how to work with his people. There's no doubt about that.
yeah. Well, my
Not to
career
not to a good
advice, don't write a
not to a
book,
good
Charles
end,
Manson
but
and Jesus Christ.
yeah.
Very, very good. Tracy, let's talk a little bit about Steve Jobs now. He really, by inventing this, he changed society. I
Yes.
mean, our lives are, this is my music player, this is my book, this is my phone, this is my email, this is my newspaper. This is, so many things have been replaced by this. It's
Yes.
amazing. So let's talk a little bit about Steve Jobs in relation first to Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Well, that was my first book.
Mhm.
Because what I was trying to do was I was trying to make this connection of our life and our spirituality. They need to mesh and not be compartmentalized. And so when I took the Steve Jobs and Jesus Christ, boy, did that upset some people. I've gotten quite a few comments about that one. But Steve Jobs was not a religious guy. He was, and the interesting thing about entrepreneurship is people equate entrepreneurship with inventor, and they think of Alexander Graham Bell and all that kind of stuff. Entrepreneurship is really pulling together things that exist, which is what Steve Jobs did, and create something greater than each individual part. And that was the iPhone.
Right.
Uh, and interestingly enough, he kind of backed into the iPhone because he was trying to make a bigger iPod. That was a big product prior to the iPhone. Was the iPod? He was trying to enhance that, so he put a phone in it, and he saw it as an iPod with a phone. And everybody else saw it as a phone with an iPod. So he really did, and in his own words, he wanted to put a dent in the universe. And he really has. I mean, he's changed society forever.
Yeah.
And
Maybe for
again,
better, maybe for worse. I don't know.
well, I think as the adoption curve shows, it's probably for better. But it's for better. I believe we're not necessarily using it the right way yet.
Right. Right.
But I think ultimately it is for the better.
Yeah.
But like I said, he was the true entrepreneur. I mean, he knew every detail of what was going on in his business. He didn't follow normal structure. He ignored human HR recommendations for employees. I mean, he did everything wrong, and it worked marvelously. And the reason was he had confidence in people. If somebody believed in his dream and his vision, he gave them work. And like his head of production, I believe she was a bookkeeper when she started working in the company, and he believed in her and her mind and her capabilities, and she ended up in charge of worldwide operations. So it's part. A lot of it is him and his leadership style and his intuitiveness. that allowed him to do what he did. And much along the way of Jesus. I mean, Jesus did everything wrong. You know, he didn't follow the teachings that like they were supposed to be followed. He believed in one God, and he believed that humans had God within them. And so he was also kind of a heretic of this, not kind of, he was a heretic of his time,
Right.
much like Steve Jobs was a heretic of his time.
Right.
You know, the standard management books, if you look as here's what you're supposed to do to be a manager, it ain't Steve Jobs. That's not him. And
Right.
the same thing is true if you're looking for somebody spiritual in his era, it wasn't Jesus Christ.
Right. Yeah. They're both rule breakers.
Yes.
Basically, they both looked at the norms, said these norms aren't right, created their own rules.
Right.
And as we look back now, you know, obviously Jesus going into the temple and overturning the tables
Yep.
was appropriate because, you know, it wasn't a place where money should be exchanged and so forth.
Right.
And the same with Steve Jobs. You know, he had an unorthodox approach to running his business. And now we see like, well, being a person of extreme vision is the only way to create something it's still a beautiful device. It's not only a
Right.
functional device, it's a thing of beauty, which
Yep.
is one of his goals as well. Aesthetics
Right.
were very important to him.
Yes. Down to
Yeah.
the packaging.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. And it's still to this day, to Tim Cook's credit, you know, the vision has carried on, you know, just
Yes.
like the vision of Jesus 2000 years later, the most influential person in the world is
Yes.
Jesus Christ, you know,
Yep.
arguably, inarguably, however you want to look at it. It's interesting when you were talking about rule breakers and about how he saw a secretary and made her, you know, an executive. You know, you see the same things in Donald Trump. He took a guy who was in charge of his security, who was a former state trooper, and made him in charge of his presidential campaign. And
Right.
yeah, and it was successful and it
Yeah.
worked because instead of following the guidelines of you have to have this pedigree or this resume, he saw value in this person that transcended his resume
Right.
and put him in charge. So I think that's interesting. So there's another book for you, Donald
There you
Trump.
go. That's the
And
next one.
half the country will love it, half the country will hate it. That's just
That's
how
right.
it'll
That's
work.
right.
Yeah, without a doubt. You've also focused in your work on Martin Luther King. We've got some
Right.
time today. Let's talk a little bit about your MLK book. What's that
Sure.
called?
It's called Constant Courage.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King Jr. and Jesus Christ. And they have the strongest parallel as far as individuals go, having the courage of their convictions and sticking with it. And Dr. King had his convictions, but he also had his own followers that were trying to change him. And he was nonviolent. Period. End of story. And anybody that decided they wanted to pursue the violence in their confrontations, he got rid of them. He said, "Those aren't my rules. You play by my rules, or you don't play with me." And so he was steadfast in his conviction to equal rights, and he was steadfast into his commitment to peaceful resolution and moving forward.
Yeah.
But they both had tragic endings. I mean,
Both martyrs.
both martyrs.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Amazing, amazing. And it seems like that is often the case of people of peace. I mean, John F. Kennedy was going to end the Vietnam War and
Right.
he was killed.
Yep.
Bobby Kennedy was likely to follow in his footsteps and he was killed.
Right.
So, you know, peacemakers unfortunately sometimes meet with violent ends, as did Jesus Christ, of course.
Right. Right.
Yeah. You know, lots of lessons. What would you say the takeaways from the MLK book are for people in business?
Uh,
Commitment, dedication to
well,
a cause.
it's there's two places it's important. One place is if you are entrepreneurial and you have your idea, you have to have the courage of your convictions, because as an entrepreneur, there's 100 people telling you it's not going to work. I mean, no matter what you do, there's, oh, you got to go get a job, you're going to starve, and blah blah blah. So you have to have the courage of your own conviction to your idea.
Right.
Then once you're in business, and let's say you're successful, then you have to have the courage to move your beliefs through your organization. And don't become a victim of your organization, which easily happens once you start having, if you hire the right people, you're going to have management issues, which is exactly the people you want to hire. If you hire all lemmings, your company's not going to be successful.
Right.
So you have to have the courage of your convictions that got you where you are in order to impart that to your staff, your employees, and whatever.
Exactly. And tuning out those people and staying focused, because if you're trying something different, something revolutionary, something norm breaking, you're going to be told it can't be done.
Right.
It's impossible. And like you said, get a real job,
Right.
And meanwhile, the people who have real jobs are stuck in, middle jobs that nobody would want,
Right.
while the other person's trying to chart a new course. So if you do want to chart a new course, you do have to have your eye on the prize. You do have to be determined and focused like MLK. So I think that is absolutely great advice.
Right.
Let's talk about your other example, Bill Belichick and Jesus Christ. Obviously, this was before Bill Belichick got a 23-year-old girlfriend.
Right.
But no, that's my joke there. I'm teasing. But obviously, Bill Belichick is a great coach, perhaps one of the greatest coaches ever. He's got 7 Super Bowl rings, or 6, perhaps, right?
Actually, 7. I think he had one.
One without Tom Brady.
Yeah, before he came to the Patriots.
Yeah.
I'm trying. Was it the Browns or the Giants? I don't remember.
Right. But he's one of the winningest coaches of all time.
Yes.
And
yeah.
Let's talk about how he relates to Jesus Christ.
Well, he relates because he's unchanging. Bill Belichick is a coach all the time. It's not like he goes and puts on his coach, here's my coach hat, now I'm going to be a coach. He's a coach 24 hours a day to all of his players, all of his employees, and he's consistent in his beliefs, and he's not preachy, and he's self-deprecating. If his team does bad, he doesn't say, boy, they had a bad day. He said, I didn't coach them properly. So he accepts the responsibility for the results of the players. And, as a player, you're kind of proud of that in your coach, to say he didn't coach me properly, even though I blew it. But he was like that all the time. So I think his example of winning is even better, because here in the U.S. we like winners, but I think his coaching style could be emulated worldwide, and that coach would be a successful coach because he stayed in character.
And Jesus was a coach to his disciples?
You betcha.
Yeah.
And coaching is like managing. Mm-hmm. It's accomplishing results through the efforts of others. And Jesus knew he wasn't going to be around very long. Right. So he took those 12, which became 11, and he really taught them. He talked parables to everybody else, but he got in the back room with his 11 and said, here's the true skinny. Here's what you've got to do. Here's what I'm expecting you to do. And he actually sent out trial runs of his disciples and his followers. And he said, go take your staff and no food, and then go out into the countryside, and take my message. So he was coaching them how to be successful. And then he had them in preseason games. And then once he was gone, then they got together and said, well, let's compare notes. What are we supposed to do? And they went out and spread the word. And now there's 1.2 billion Christians in the world.
Exactly.
So he got the message across.
Yeah. True leader, true coach, like you said, prepared his team to play games without him, so to speak,
Yep.
and to spread the word, to build the church. And yeah, it's an amazing comparison. I think very rightful as well. How many books do you have in this series, Doctor, by the way?
Just right now, they're just the four.
Okay, well, four is quite a bit. So we'll keep our viewers at home busy reading the books, hopefully. They're all wonderful. You'll learn lessons from each one of these dramatic figures in society, whether it's Bill Belichick, Martin Luther King, Steve Jobs, or Mr. Rogers. And they all sound disparate, and they are. And that's why you'll learn different lessons from them as well. You and I were chatting before, and you made a Wizard of Oz comparison. That was quite entertaining. Tell us a little bit about that,
Well,
Doctor.
I was reading something about the movie The Wizard of Oz, and then I started thinking about the characters. And as it turns out, the Tin Man wanted a heart, which is Mr. Rogers, because it was about people. Scarecrow wanted a brain, which is Steve Jobs, and the entrepreneurial book. The Lion wanted courage. That one really worked. Like Martin Luther King. And then I was thinking, well, there's the coaching character. Where's the coaching character in The Wizard of Oz? It was Galinda,
Yeah.
the good fairy, that started them on their journey that said, follow the yellow brick road. So she was coaching Judy. I've got Judy Garland on the brain
Right.
now.
I know who you're talking. Dorothy.
Dorothy, yeah.
Dorothy?
Thank you. Yeah, she was coaching Dorothy on what to do. And then at the end of the movie, she said, you've always had a way to go home. It's the ruby slippers. So I look her as kind of like the coach in that movie that kind of got the ball rolling, literally, and also kind of got her back home.
Yeah.
So I just saw an interesting parallel there. I don't know if it means anything other than a little bit of cosmic recognition.
Exactly.
They weren't bad ideas.
No, they're great ideas. In fact, you could almost make an argument that Jesus Christ and the wizard had parallels as well.
That's true.
Yeah. Because he was running the kingdom. Some people feared him as if he was a god to be feared. He turned out just to be a man with godlike powers, and part of that power was showing us the beauty within ourselves, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yep.
I'll
Not
give
a
you a
bad
credit
one.
for that one.
Exactly. Where would you take the series next? Who would you focus on if you were to write another book?
I haven't really thought about it.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, it could almost be anybody.
Right.
And I think what I've got to think about, what I got to pray about, is a little more inspiration, because that's where this came from. The inspiration for the first book, Steve Jobs and the Extreme Entrepreneurs, was strictly from wherever it comes from, that inspiration. Right. So I've just got to be quiet and wait for more inspiration, because I don't. Things are so crazy right now in our world,
right,
that I haven't pondered that yet.
Right.
But I will, and you'll be the first to know.
Of course. Well, I'm looking forward to that. I think Elon Musk, if I'm going to throw one out there, certainly has a lot to learn from. I mean, he's certainly forthright, like Jesus, is willing to be persecuted, willing to be crucified for his beliefs. I mean,
which he is.
Yeah. I mean, he's being really put through a hard time because he's an advocate for free speech. So I think that's a comparison right there, of course. And the Steve Jobs, your first book, was such a natural. Each one of these books is great. You're going to hold it up there for us?
Yeah, I'm just taking a note, because I think we just had an inspiration there.
Okay, good.
Elon Musk, he does exemplify a lot of Christ-like characteristics. You're right.
Yeah, without a doubt. Like I said, and he's forthright. He's speaking his mind, despite what the Pharisees and so forth say. So I do think there's a lot to mine there. And then, of course, lots of great lessons for different entrepreneurs and business people, like all of these books have. So you've done a great job with these. Doctor, and we're really looking forward to your podcast as well. I think that's going to be terrific. Have you gone into production with that yet?
I'm just right on the edge of starting now. I'm
Awesome.
kind
So
of
we will
learning the
look for
ropes.
that. Okay, great. We will look for that on Spotify. We will look for that on Apple Podcasts and everywhere else you find your podcasts. Dr. Tracy Emerick has written 4 amazing books looking at the lives of different people, from Martin Luther King to Bill Belichick to Mr. Rogers to Martin Luther King. Did I say him twice? Martin
No,
Luther, Bill
Steve
Belichick,
Jobs.
Mr. Rogers, and Steve Jobs. Okay.
Right.
And the books we primarily focused on today are called Nifty Neighbors, Mr. Rogers and Jesus Christ,
Right.
and Extreme Entrepreneurs, Steve Jobs and Jesus Christ. In
Correct.
these books, the doctor takes a deep look at the values and traits of these influential figures, exploring what we can learn about being good neighbors and bold entrepreneurs, as well as, if you look at the Martin Luther King book, how we can be more courageous. And if we look at Bill Belichick's book, how we can be better coaches to our business colleagues as well. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you. I've certainly enjoyed it.
I always enjoy talking to you, always lots of fun to the folks at home. I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.